All right, well, thank you for coming. I am Natalie Bursztyn. I teach here at the University of Montana, Department of Geosciences, and I'm going to give you this presentation on my experience developing the online lecture and lab courses for Earth System Science. Cleverly titled Rock Online, thanks to one of the many amazing UMOnline team members I've worked with, Leroy. Thanks, Leroy. So, the outline for today is this. How do I go from active learning to asynchronous online? And I speak here as the person featured in this photograph on the Athabasca Glacier hugging an erratic, a future erratic. It's not an erratic yet, but it will, well, it might be now. So I went into this whole online world as an outdoor field geoscientist, and the idea of passively learning through a screen was terrifying and disgusting to me. So this course development and this talk is going to walk through goal setting, the lecture and the lab courses and their differences, the online environment considerations that I took into account, and then my final thoughts for now, which are never final. Everything is always a working draft. So let's start with goal setting. Just a couple of weeks ago in the Chronicle of Higher Ed was this article called When the Cat Destroys Your Sweater, Knit Something New, especially appealing to me as a knitter. But this was about this pandemic and trying to get back to pre-pandemic teaching, which brings me to goal setting 1, attitude change. When I was told, like many of you were all told, you have to suddenly teach online now, figure it out. You probably were devastated and frustrated, maybe going through the stages of grief, which I can no longer remember the order of, but I certainly did that. And I knew as a teacher that if I had a bad attitude about that environment, that was going to translate to my students. And there was no way I was going to be able to successfully teach them through a medium I didn't want to use and felt bad thoughts about. So I had to change my attitude. And the way I did that was think about, well, if I can't take them into the field, which is the strength of teaching geoscience in the field, is to use the natural environment, how can I use the online environment to its strengths? What are the strengths the online environment has, and how can I curate my course to use those instead of thinking about trying to take my class and wedge it into a hole that doesn't exist? And then the next set of questions is, who is enrolling online? There are students who are enrolling online now, not because of the pandemic, but for geographic reasons. There's students in my class right now who are in Idaho, in Washington, in really rural parts of Montana, and those students don't really have a choice to be able to enroll face-to-face without serious financial hardships. There are students who are enrolled in my class right now for social reasons. They have various social anxiety issues and personal issues that don't allow them to be in this face-to-face setting. And there are students who are enrolled for scheduling reasons. They're seniors, super seniors, they've got 1 credit left, they left their natural science to the very last, and they cannot fit it in their schedule any other way, so they can take it online. And there are students who are enrolled for other reasons that I don't necessarily know, but I might speculate on. But if I think about those first 3, there are really legitimate reasons that we should manifest a strong online curriculum. And the last goal setting is, how do I create an equitable learning environment? How do I use this online space in a way that gives them the same or equitable, it won't be the same, learning experience that they would get in a face-to-face setting? And in my face-to-face setting, in the lecture, it's active learning. They are operating in a very different space than a traditional lecture. This idea of lecturing at you right now is quite foreign and challenging for me. And in the lab class, even more so, I embody the practice of science. I want them to lab by doing, not by filling in worksheets. So to translate that in the online environment offered some different challenges as well. So let's take a look. In my class, one might call it flipped these days, but in my context of active learning, I do spend a full day where I hand them out this black and white geologic map of the Homestake mine area in Montana near Yellowstone. And before the class, students will have read about rock formation and mineral formation in their open educational resource online textbook. And the idea is that they now have to apply some of those concepts to an activity, a real world activity. And in this case, it is the pretend to be part 1, part 2, part 3 exercise. Part 1, they pretend they are already geologists and they're learning how to read and interpret a geologic map, applying mineral formation and rock formation on this 2-dimensional black and white map setting. And then they can pretend, and as the business majors in my class do, about how they could use that knowledge to apply it to economics, and they're in the get-rich exploration endeavor. And then the third part is everyone who wants to save the world these days, how can they think about that perspective using this same map? No part of this day is really me lecturing. It's about them thinking through the cause and effect prospects. And they do this in small groups, they do this in pairs, they mark on the map, they draw concept maps, linking causes and effects, thinking through these different standpoints, and then they share it out and we have a full class discussion in a lecture hall like this one. And then at the end of the day, they'll submit their work for points, which I will do in an ungraded way. It's a participation exercise, but we take it up and we talk about it so they have all of the right answers, which there are many. That doesn't work online. I can't just give them a map and say, pretend to be geologists. What are your economic considerations and how are you going to save the environment? Without guidance, without stepping through and applying that material in a very deliberate manner, that doesn't work in the online space. So this is where I started. And when I was handed the powers of the UMOnline team, I said, well, what can we do then? I want my online class to be active learning. I want it to be interactive. I do not want to record, and I don't think I could record hours and hours of lectures. I did record hours and hours of lectures, but in very short snippets. How can we take this idea of what I do in class and do something comparable in the online environment? And so this led me to this suite of what we can do online. We can set up Moodle with books, integrating the lecture videos with H5P, which I will show you what that looks like. My ungrading grade assessment mechanism from face-to-face class can be translated through the gradebook in online and using personalization and choice so that students can engage more with higher stakes assignments and less with more lower stakes assignments, still keeping the workload reasonably manageable for me. So this is what the lecture class looks like, or the top bar. There are 14 units. They're numbered, as you can see there. And then at the end is the optional components with the creative project, extra credit, and the final exam. There's only one exam, and it is the final, and it is open note. But because of the way I've structured the class, it's not really a cheatable open book exam. If they don't have the notes from participating in all of these low stake assignments, they have no material that they can share in this final exam. So this is what the top of it looks like, and if you click inside of the first one, you will get to a Moodle book. And we have these cute little custom-made graphics. Thanks again, UMOnline team. The book opens with this explanation. This is obviously the minerals book, and there are 3 chapters in it. And if you click on the first chapter there, you'll see this information which says you should read and watch in the same sort of time frame. Start by reading. You see there's a link right below Introduction to Minerals. Read chapter 3.1. Click the link. They'll get to the OER resource. They'll see the section they need to read. And the idea is to then partner that with the accompanying lecture video, which looks like this. I was instructed, keep your videos short because they have low attention span, and that's great. So chunk them out into small little pieces. And with H5P, you can see that this is labeled slide 2 of 5. So H5P is, I'm not really sure what that stands for, but it's a function we have in our Moodle setup. And you can embed the videos within it, and when they're done, you can embed self-check quizzes. Totally low stakes. They can just answer the question, which is sort of the main learning objective from that mini lecture, and see if they're right or not, and there's no points attached, but they can know. I also have embedded within it my pet project, which are finger-doodled animations that now are voiced thanks to, again, the UMOnline team, and in particular, Leroy, our videographer. This is basically just a 45-minute talk saying Leroy is great. You're welcome. And then at the end, you can see your total score. But for each of the chapters, it's made in this way, so they are designed to be interactive, that they'll watch these short videos, they'll do their self-check, the only place there's multiple choice anywhere. And then within each of the lecture videos, I ask questions of the students that I suggest they can discuss in our discussion forums, which you'll see under ungrading is the first one, the discussion forum. So this is just the second one you can see here. Again, we went to the video, self-check question, another little video, self-check question, and then we can now move on to what the discussion forum looks like. Because in my short videos, I'm asking about material that relates to learning objectives, but I also want them to engage more deeply than just superficial memorization of whatever I've just said. In the discussion forums, I ask questions through the videos, and I also ask them to relate their everyday lives or personal experiences or anything of interest that relates to that topic in there. And if they participate, they get a point. Ungrading, it's a participation or not. So here we can see I asked a question about why is the Bronze Age named the Bronze Age? Why is the Stone Age named the Stone Age? And there was a discussion that happened around that. And it went on, students interacted with each other, just like the information age, what would we call it? There was a whole argument about the information is a resource, information is not a resource. What resource are we relying on? Should it be called the lithium age? It went on and on. It was awesome. It was infinitely better than the sort of discussion you can have in a face-to-face class, because in a face-to-face class, there isn't time for that. But as the low stakes just participate and engage, they were able to freely argue about these things. And then another student chimed in, they got interested in plastiglomerate, which was a side note. I have to be careful about side notes because sometimes it goes in a wrong direction. Like I joked about the salt age, which doesn't exist, but possibly some students think that it does now. So totally low stakes, and embraced this hiding behind the screen discussion forum that they can easily interact with each other and engage with each other and get their points by discussing plastiglomerate or information age naming, but they're discussing with each other, which is part of connecting the dots in this class. The other ungrading low stakes is the synthesis assignments. So for the synthesis assignments, each unit at the end, I give a reflection prompt. The example for minerals is this prompt. I can explain what a mineral is and some ways that minerals are integral resources that humans use all the time. It's pretty broad, except for the I can explain what a mineral is. And the idea is that they can answer this in any way that suits them. They can submit a video, which they've done, where they talk to their phone and explain their answer. They can draw flow charts. They can write short essays. They can do whatever. And what it does for me is immediately shows me, yes, they know, no, they don't know. I need to address a misconception. The salt age isn't a thing, for example. It's a big misconception that I need to address. But it also gives them the freedom to draw by hand, to make elaborate posters, which is pretty impressive, but absolutely got submitted this semester, or like I said, record videos. So for me, I give them points regardless, but I can tell whether my students are on track with the material, and I can also address errors, and they just get it for participating. And this also all adds up to their notes. At the end of the day, I'm basically just asking them to take notes, which is what you do in a class. And if they take their weekly synthesis, or not their weekly, their unit synthesis, they'll have 14 of them at the end of this semester, and just use their synthesis points, they should have enough information to supplement for writing their open note final exam, using specific examples that they've created from my requests in class. So how do I do personalization and choice? The options are You can participate in your discussion forum and the weekly reflections and have all the eggs in the final exam basket, very high stakes. Or if that's very scary, which it should be, then you can do a creative project where you apply some deeper knowledge in a creative way. I love the creative project. By making it optional, I've shifted the balance where students will engage with it because they like doing creative things, or they'll engage with it because they want to make sure that they've spread their points out and their final exam is lower stakes. But the results are truly an expression of who the students are and what they want to share and how they have great strengths. So this student did a comic book, and there's a written component that I didn't paste up here of the story of Glacial Lake, Missoula, and the formation of our modern campus. This student focused on the story of the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in Pompeii, inspired by this joke in that class was the goodest boy, which relates to Pangea, a long story. Other students have written things like children's stories. This one's a children's story style book that was geared towards climbers. So if you're a climber, you might get the jokes in here. I'm not a climber, so I don't. But I receive stories, lesson plans. I've gotten dances, videos of choreographed dances, poetry, and even lesson plans for students who are aspiring to be teachers. So in all of these, they are using this creative project to communicate to me their understanding of some concept, which is great for the class, but it also offsets the points, and that's how they have their personalization and choice. So that's how the online lecture class is working. Now the face-to-face lab was a whole different beast, a totally different beast altogether. For me, as I mentioned, it's the practice of science. I want them to observe, I want them to measure, I want them to graph. I want them to interpret and hypothesize and make experiments and run models and have ownership over their learning experience and really be truly embedded in the science. And you can see that in these photos from last semester with groundwater modeling and contamination. And this is a different challenge to participate in online. So in order to make the learning experience equitable, the first step was to figure out how I can make 12 labs that are face-to-face equivalent to 12 labs that are online. And step one is look for lab kits. Find that the real-world lab kits are enormously expensive and quite terrible. And so opt to make my own and supplement stuff that works well online, remembering that the online environment has strengths that we don't have in the face-to-face world, and use the digital technology for labs specifically. An example of a labor of love is the groundwater modeling lab kit, where each pocket aquifer with 2 wells, confined and unconfined, are made by hand for students to run little experiments with online on their own. Ironically, this video has gone viral for me. None of my other stuff I've ever posted is of interest, but everyone seems to love the making of the pocket aquifer. I don't know how much the students love using the pocket aquifer at home, yet to be determined, but I do know it works. There's a little pump. You can pump out water from the well. You can add contaminants. But this takes time and an army of TAs to build for each one, and they get mailed off to the students. In contrast, we can use tools like the Earth Viewer, which I'm showing this photo of here, as well as my annotations to show the students how to use it. Slide down way to the beginning. This is a great way to travel through time and rotate the continents around, and it's perfect for online because it's a web app. And the students can use that in conjunction. They do use this a few times in my class for plate tectonics, and they also use it for climate. And we can also use things like the Google Earth time lapse. Is that playing? Yes. So this is the Aral Sea, which we can watch through real satellite imagery changing. So in an example with satellite imagery, we can use this for making observations. So students can observe the visual differences through time and document those observations and make interpretations about the feedbacks and forcings that are influencing the environment they're watching. So with Earth Viewer and time lapse, Absolutely no-brainer to use those to replace labs that we would do in the classroom that would be otherwise different. So the lab class looks like this, very similar. We've got the units, the 12 labs the students have. Each one is a topic. And within each one, I use the same video H5P setup that I used in the lecture class. So we can see the slides here. There's a lab, the instructions, download the lab assignment file, have your kit nearby, and follow along while watching the video. They still have to watch the video. And then I also have integrated this hotspot image factor, which is another Moodle tool we offer. So here, the pluses are all hotspots. You click over it and it gives you information. There's other tools we can use that are along the same lines, like drag and drop. So for rivers, they can drag these labels into the correct locations, or they can even drag and drop. So here it's the atomic structure of the minerals to match to the crystal form. I wouldn't have been able to make any of these on my own, so once again, thanks UMOnline folks. And just like with the other stuff, it's a self-check, and you can see the little 3 out of 3 correct on this one. So the idea here is they're doing their activity with the lab, either using a digital tool or the lab kit, engaged in the practice of science, but they also have this interactive effect with the videos and the hotspot images. So that's how it's set up. Unresolved issues, students who don't log into Moodle, not really sure how to address them. Students who do log in but don't ever submit anything and don't respond to early alert, not really sure how to deal with that. It's very heartbreaking what happens. And the persistent issue that is something that we as academics all need to resolve is the students who choose the online environment, not because of geographic reasons, not because of social reasons, but because they're afraid of science, they feel like sciences are not their strong suit, and they think that in the online class they are going to be able to get their science credit to graduate without actually doing science. And as you have hopefully seen, that doesn't happen in my class, and I'm sure there's other issues too. If you know, you know. This is my favorite deer. I've named him Lumpy. I sort of promised he would be in this presentation, and he is. I'm just going to skip to the last slide here, which is thank you, my amazing resources. As I mentioned Leroy probably 10 times. The videos for every lab, the animations that are in my lecture class, this is all thanks to Leroy. The graphic designers I worked with, those little images that are custom for every single unit with minerals, plate tectonics, every rock type, everything. Sierra started them, Aviana did the next round. They're fantastic. They really personalize the whole shell, and I've gotten compliments on how friendly it is, which is great. Justin, oh my God, Justin has done so much. Every H5P image, every H5P slideshow, reorganizing Moodle shells and being on panic alert. Strongly recommend if you want to do something, just reach out to this crew of people because they are really helpful. And then finally, Jeannie was super helpful in helping me structure my grade book so that I could make it a choose your own adventure point system and allow the flexibility of you can do the creative project or not, and participation points ungraded. So they are all the most incredible crew of folks that I have ever worked with in trying to create some sort of curriculum, which this talk is, I said, should I just say who did the actual work? Because honestly, I don't feel like it was me. So I have any questions you have, I'll do my best to answer, or just like name the UMOnline person you should ask. Thank you for attending.
What's your target length of time for an online video?
10 minutes for an online video at most. Some of them I've tried to make even shorter and break up with discussion posts, but I will be honest, I have definitely failed. There are a few that hit the 11, 12 minute mark, and it's just sort of hard. But no more than 10 is the goal.
How far ahead of time did you start designing, Dr. Bursztyn?
I started designing this at the beginning of fall semester, and that was to run for this spring semester. I started working with the entire team of people probably in middle of October, I think, which I was told was plenty of time, but we most definitely were working with everyone all the way through the rest of the fall semester, off and on through Christmas break, and right up until the beginning of classes started in January. And that was largely because as soon as I learned what we could do, I shifted gears to do those things. There was no reason to leave out some higher level online interactive element for some aspect just because we hadn't thought about it earlier. And yeah, I just pushed everybody. As long as they were willing to do the work and I was willing to do the work too, then we all just did it. I'm definitely not a try one element. I'm definitely a burn it all down and start over immediately kind of a person.
So with that in mind, what would you, if you had it to do over again, what would you do differently?
If I had to do this over again, I would have, when I started in September or August of fall semester, I would have started by contacting Nancy and the UMOnline team, and we would have done the work throughout the fall semester from the beginning instead of waiting until the halfway point to ask for expertise. That doesn't really answer the question that well, but it would have bought us all back Christmas vacation time.
What advice would you give as an instructor to another faculty member that may be apprehensive about working in an online environment or in Moodle because they're just not, they don't feel like they're savvy with technology?
Yeah, you don't have to be savvy with technology at all. I think not being afraid to ask what's possible is the starting point. And that was the turning point between me sort of struggling through recording my own videos and then me being like, okay, let's make this happen. Because as soon as I was introduced to what tools we do have in Moodle, it changed the game. I can make this interactive. I can design it around the way I want my class to run. Andrew.
So in terms of online learning, we can think about how it sort of meets the needs of multiple kind of stakeholders, right? So there's the administrators who want to increase enrollment and revenue. There's the student side of things, so there's kind of logistics and convenience, and there's are they learning better? I mean, I hate to use that simplified term, but you know, what are they getting out of sort of this platform versus a face-to-face? There's also the faculty's perspective from the perspective of time. How much time does it take, averaged over a long term, not just of setting it up, but setting it up and then running it multiple times to do it this way versus doing it sort of traditional face-to-face? So I'm just curious of your thoughts on each of those, because it seems like from the first point, maximizing enrollment, this is not, you know, a MOOC type approach.
No.
But yeah, if you could just comment on, you know, any combination of those things I threw out there.
Yeah, I think about all of those things as well. I think online for maximizing enrollment certainly has potential, but in the format I've chosen of ungrading and choose your own adventure, and my final exam, which is open note requiring examples, specific examples from class, but whatever examples they want requires me reading them. And at some point it becomes, there's a point where there's too many students to be realistic to do by one instructor. In terms of the student learning, that is such a difficult question to answer, because in my class in face-to-face and in online, it is absolutely in the hands of the learner how much they're going to take away. I have had students who have said how my class is the hardest and easiest class they've ever taken. They have to do the least amount of work, but somehow their brain is reeling afterwards by all of the thinking they're doing in real time. But I can't force online for that to happen. That's up to them how deeply they engage, because I'm not, walking around the classroom and making sure they're chatting with their friends and neighbors about the home stake mine rather than the home game or something. In terms of workload, those who know me and know I am a creepy office dweller at all times know that my idea probably of what a reasonable workload is versus others is probably not on the same platform. This is a lot of work. And I hope that the payoff is that now that it's set up, I can roll it through a few times without the setup aspect again. The management is some maintenance things. This semester, I have a learning assistant who is an undergraduate student who's in my face-to-face class and in the online course. And his job in the online course is to interact with students in the discussion forum and answer questions that he can answer, which is the same job he has in the face-to-face class. When I did online before, without this elaborate of a setup, I had a TA, actually I had 3 TAs who managed didn't have a choose your own adventure. Everyone had to do every assignment. So I had 3 TAs who were helping me manage the discussion forum and the assignments. By changing it this way, I made it more manageable workload-wise by making it ungraded. But I can imagine if there was 150 students or 250 students, the ungrading is not so manageable.
I'm really impressed that you're using OER. That's great to see. It's a nice cost saving for students. Can you talk about your reasons for choosing that, and if you make adaptations?
I do not make adaptations. My reasons for choosing OER are, I've been using OER since OER became available in any capacity. I have 4 books that I refer to the students throughout there. There's one that is the continuous one for the reading assignments for all units except for Unit 14, which has to come from a different book, OER text, online text. Absolutely, the cost of textbooks has risen tremendously, and in our field in geoscience is arguably at the lower divisional level. The changes in material has not been substantial for a long time. So the amount of info that's coming in a $200 brand new book versus a used $10 1985 book versus an OER that has typos and YouTube videos is pretty minimal. Especially in the way that I teach, where I want them to have some basic background that I can apply. Again, using the minerals example, I don't want to lecture about, here are all of the mineral groups, here are all of the mineral shapes. It bores me to think about lecturing about that, so I'm not interested in doing that. But they can read it, and then we can talk about, well, why do they have specific shapes? Why do they break in certain ways? And we can dive a little bit deeper in this, that's what my lectures in this are about, and the questions for the discussion forum, and what I do in a face-to-face class. So to refer to specific details in textbook is kind of irrelevant in my style of teaching. But it started because of cost, for sure.
Yeah, I was just wondering how many of the students chose option B versus option A on your ungrading. I always hear mixed things from students about, oh, they don't want an exam, but then they don't actually want to do much in terms of the participation assignments either, so, it's always fun.
Yeah, last semester, I think there were maybe 20% chose the creative project. I do not know for this semester because it's going to be due 2 weeks after spring break. I had a lot of students in that, of the 20%, I think it jumped up from 15 to 20% in the last couple of weeks of the class when there was a sudden panic about a final exam that was looming. This optional creative project is new from last semester. Prior to that, I made it mandatory, and one of the reasons I wanted to make it optional was to give them the choice, but also because it truly crushed me when I had students who didn't do the creative project and did well on the final exam and then got a C in the class. And that's because they didn't do all the work, but not because they didn't know the material. And that is not the point of learning. The point of learning is, did you walk away here with some understanding? In the way that I teach, there's no memorization. So if they were able to get an A on the exam and then finish the class with a C because they didn't do a cute little comic book about a dead dog that died in a volcanic eruption, that's not really fair. And that was on me as the instructor to not have thought about that possibly happening. I'll report back. The very long answer, Nancy.
On the creative project, do they have to run that by you in advance to make sure?
Yes and no. They can run it by me if they're worried about it not meeting the criteria. The criteria are pretty basic. It has to involve humans and the Earth system, and it can't be a research paper. At the 100 level, I'm sure we all know, it has to be not a research paper. So if they do something truly artistic, like I've got a beautiful painting in my office right now that some students did last year, and they did it collaboratively, so they ran that by me. Can we paint a picture together? And they each had to write an artist statement that explained what they were depicting in it and what their role was in that work. And they ran that by me because you can't just turn in a painting and expect some random geologist to know what the heck that means. But they usually do ask, and often they'll ask more than they need to. But it is pretty wide open. There's lots of forms of communicating that are not a poorly written research paper. Alrighty. Well, thanks, you guys.